The air inside the waxen gallery was cold and still, thick with a silence that pressed against Mara's eardrums like a physical weight. Her footsteps echoed faintly on the polished floor, swallowed quickly by the cavernous space. She paused beneath the dim glow of a flickering overhead bulb, the light casting long, distorted shadows across rows of wax figures, arrayed like silent sentinels. Mara raised her camera, the lens focusing on a statue of a woman in Victorian dress, her eyes glassy, lips parted slightly as though on the verge of speech. The realism was unsettling, the delicate veins in the pale wax skin, the subtle blush on her cheeks, the tiny flecks of dust caught in the folds of her gown. Mara's breath hitched, a chill crawling up her spine. She clicked the shutter, then lowered the camera to study the figure more closely. Something was off. The woman's hand twitched a minute, almost imperceptible movement. Mara blinked, wondering if it was a trick of the light or her imagination playing cruel games. But no, the fingers curled slightly, as if reaching for something unseen. Her heart hammered wildly. She took a cautious step back, eyes locked on the figure's face, which now seemed to hold a flicker of life in its glassy stare. "Simon," she whispered, voice trembling. "Did you see that?" Simon Hale, standing a few paces behind her, adjusted his glasses, his brows knitting in concern. "See what?" she pointed, but when he turned, the hand was still again. "Maybe you're just tired." Mara shook her head. She knew what she saw. The suffocating stillness of the museum had begun to crack, revealing something far more sinister beneath. Her pulse quickened, breaths shallow and sharp in the frigid air. Determined to prove she wasn't losing her mind, Mara edged closer to the figure. The gallery felt alive now, the walls closing in, the silence more oppressive. Her fingers brushed the cool wax of the statue's arm. Suddenly, a cold grip wrapped around her wrist. Panic exploded in her chest as every muscle seized, her limbs stiffening as if petrified. The world tilted. She was frozen, caught in the statue's pose, her breath stolen by an invisible force. Mara, Simon's shout shattered the silence. His hands grasped her shoulders, shaking her with desperate urgency. Slowly, sensation returned, the paralysis loosening like a breaking spell. Mara gasped, stumbling back, eyes wide with terror. Around them, the wax figures seemed to lean closer, their frozen faces twisted with silent menace. "We have to get out of here," Mara choked out, voice barely audible. Simon nodded, leading her swiftly through the maze of statues, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Behind them, a faint creaking echoed, the sound of wax stretching and shifting in a way that defied reason. Mara's mind raced, the encounter shattering her disbelief and igniting a desperate urgency to uncover the truth. Outside the gallery's cold embrace, Mara pressed her forehead against the frosted glass of the exit door, struggling to steady her breath. The waxen gallery was no mere museum. It was a prison of frozen souls, and the wax figures were not statues, they were captors. Mara's investigation had just become a fight for survival. The shadows lengthened as the night deepened, and somewhere inside, the curator's sinister presence watched, waiting. Mara knew the horrors beneath the wax were only beginning to reveal themselves, and if she wasn't careful, she too would become a permanent exhibit in the suffocating stillness. But she wouldn't give up, not yet. Not while any flicker of life remained in her racing heart. With Simon by her side, she vowed to confront the darkness lurking beneath the wax, no matter the cost. As the door clicked shut behind them, a single wax hand twitched once more in the fading light, a silent promise of the nightmare still to come. The room was suffused with a dim, flickering light, cast by a lone candle perched precariously atop a rickety wooden crate. Shadows danced along the peeling wallpaper like restless spirits, their movements echoing the unease that gripped Mara as she sat opposite Lydia Crow. The former employee's thin frame was hunched forward, her hands trembling as they clutched a faded, sepia-toned photograph. The image depicted a gaunt man with piercing black eyes and a grim expression. Elias Voss, the curator. Lydia's voice was barely a whisper, fragile yet charged with a painful intensity. "He wasn't always like this," she began, pausing to steady her breath. "When I first joined the museum, Elias was different. A passionate artist, obsessed with capturing life in wax. Yes, but there was warmth in his eyes." Mara leaned in, her sharp eyes reflecting the candlelight, signaling her full attention. "What changed?" she asked softly. Lydia swallowed hard, fingers tightening round the photograph. The loss, his family, it shattered him. After that, it was like he was consumed by a darkness no one could reach. He became obsessed not just with preserving life, but with freezing it forever. Eternal stillness, eternal control. The air in the cramped room grew heavier, the silence stretching taut between them as Lydia's words sank in. Mara's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the curator's tragic descent. The wax figures, so disturbingly lifelike, were no longer mere art, they were prisons, vessels for stolen souls. "He performed rituals," Lydia continued, her voice trembling. "Dark rituals that bound the souls of those who vanished here to their waxen forms. It was his way of conquering death, of stopping time itself. But it wasn't salvation, only eternal suffocation." Mara's heart pounded, the oppressive stillness of the museum seeping into her bones. She could almost hear the faint whispers that seemed to rise from the very walls, the echoes of trapped souls pleading in silence. "How did you escape?" she asked. Lydia's eyes darted nervously toward the door. "I tried to resist, but the fear was suffocating. I barely made it out. Now, I want to help you stop him before he claims more victims." A sudden creak from the hallway jolted them both. Mara's breath hitched as she rose, instincts sharpened by months of investigation. The danger was no longer abstract. It was close, lurking just beyond the shadows. "Thank you, Lydia," Mara said, her voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. "Your story, it changes everything." As they prepared to delve deeper into the museum's darkest secrets, Mara felt a fire ignite within her, a fierce determination fueled by the weight of Lydia's confession. The curator was no longer just a shadowy figure in the background. He was a tragic monster whose twisted desire for control threatened to consume them all. With a final glance at the photograph, Mara whispered to herself, "I will end this. No one else will be lost beneath the wax." Outside, the waxen gallery loomed, silent and cold, its eerie stillness a facade masking the horrors that festered within. The battle for the trapped souls was just beginning, and Mara knew the path ahead would test every ounce of her courage and resolve. But even as she steeled herself, a nagging doubt lingered. How deep did Elias Voss's darkness truly run? And could she survive the suffocating nightmare that awaited in the heart of the waxen gallery? The candle flickered once more, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like fingers, promising that the stillness beneath the wax was far from over. Mara swallowed hard, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her like a shroud. Yet beneath that weight, a spark of hope glimmered. With Lydia's courage guiding her, she would face the darkness and fight to shatter the curse that held the vanished captive. The night was far from over, and the true horror was yet to come. The waxen gallery seemed to hold its breath as Mara, Ellison, and Simon Hale stepped beyond the grand entrance into the dimly lit corridors. The air was heavy, thick with an unspoken menace that clung to their skin, pressing down on their chests with invisible fingers. The wax figures lining the walls stood silent and still, yet their glassy eyes seemed to track every movement, reflecting flickering shadows that danced with a life of their own. Mara's camera hung from her neck, its lens capturing the unnerving tableau, but the photographs never quite seemed to capture the eerie atmosphere that gnawed at her nerves. Simon adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "The place feels like it's watching us," he muttered, voice low, "almost like the wax itself is alive." Mara nodded, the hairs on her arms prickling. "I can feel it too, like the walls are closing in." Their uneasy exploration was abruptly halted by the sudden appearance of Jonathan Reed. The security guard's broad frame blocked the narrow hallway, his expression stern and unreadable beneath the harsh overhead lighting. He wore the crisp uniform of the museum staff, but his eyes held a hardness that Mara hadn't noticed before. "You're not supposed to be here," Jonathan said, voice cold and authoritative. "This area is off limits." Mara squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. "I'm here to write a story. I have every right to be anywhere in the museum." Jonathan's gaze didn't waver, but an unsettling smile flickered at the edges of his mouth. "The curator doesn't like visitors poking around where they shouldn't. You'd do well to remember that." Simon stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "We're just trying to understand what's happening here about the disappearances." Jonathan's eyes darkened and his voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Some truths are better left buried beneath the wax." Before they could respond, a faint murmur reached their ears, a voice, low and hypnotic, drifting from an unseen corner of the museum. Mara's heart hammered as she recognized the tone, the inflection. Elias Voss. The curator was near. Driven by a mixture of fear and determination, Mara and Simon edged closer to a narrow service door slightly ajar. Through the crack, they could hear Elias's voice weaving a strange cadence, words that seemed to ripple like a dark spell. He spoke of preservation, eternal stillness, and the price of defying death. The museum's staff responded in hushed tones, their voices laced with unease but obedience. It was clear that Ilias's influence was no mere professional authority, it was a supernatural grip tightening around those who worked beneath his watchful eyes. Mara swallowed hard, the oppressive atmosphere wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. The wax figures nearby seemed to shimmer faintly, their eyes flickering with an otherworldly glow. She could almost feel the malevolent presence of the curator pressing down on her, a weight that threatened to crush her resolve. "We need to be careful," Simon whispered urgently. "He's more dangerous than we thought." Mara nodded, the fire of determination burning brighter despite the fear clawing at her insides. "We can't let him win, not after everything we've uncovered." But as Jonathan's footsteps echoed closer, the cruel reality settled in. The curator's grip was tightening. And every step Mara took deeper into the waxen gallery plunged her further into a suffocating nightmare where the line between life and wax blurred, and the price of discovery might be more than she could bear. The hallways seemed to close in, shadows deepening as the lurking presence of Elias Voss grew ever more palpable. Mara's breath came shallow, the silence around her broken only by the faint, unsettling creaks that whispered through the museum's ancient bones. The fight was far from over, and the curator's grip was tightening with every passing moment, threatening to extinguish the light of truth before it could ever see the dawn. As Mara turned to Simon, determination stealing her features, she knew one thing with chilling certainty. The sinister heart of the waxen gallery beat stronger than ever, and escaping its grasp would demand all her courage and wit. The shadows lengthened, and the waxen eyes watched, waiting for the moment to close in. The air in the lower corridors of the waxen gallery was thick and stale, pressing heavily against Mara Ellison's chest with each shallow breath. The faint hum of distant flickering lights barely penetrated the dense shadows that clung to the narrow hallways like a living entity. Her footsteps, once confident and purposeful, had transformed into cautious, nearly silent taps, as if any louder sound might awaken the dormant horrors around her. She paused, her eyes scanning the walls lined with endless wax figures, their glassy eyes reflecting the dim light, following her every movement with unsettling stillness. The corridor twisted and turned, a labyrinth of claustrophobic passages that seemed designed to disorient. Mara's wristwatch had long since stopped making sense. The hands spun erratically, mocking the passage of time in this suffocating tomb. She swallowed hard, the dryness in her throat a tangible reminder of the oppressive atmosphere tightening around her. The cold seeped through her jacket, but it was not the cold of the arid. It was the cold of something far more sinister, an invisible weight that chilled her soul. As she ventured deeper, the wax figures grew grotesquely lifelike. Their skin, so smooth and pale, caught the flickering light, revealing veins and fine lines that should not have been possible on mere wax. Their faces were frozen in expressions of rapture, agony, or silent screams, and their glassy eyes seemed to harbor secrets that pressed against Mara's mind like a relentless tide. A shudder passed through her. For the briefest moment, she could have sworn one of the figures blinked. The walls seemed to breathe, subtly pulsing in and out, as if the museum itself was alive and breathing alongside her. A distant whisper echoed down the passage, a soft, indistinct murmur that set Mara's nerves alight. She turned abruptly, heart hammering, but the corridor behind her was empty, save for the unyielding stillness of the waxen sentinels. Her breath caught as the shadows lengthened and flickered, distorting the familiar shapes into monstrous forms. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. The floor beneath her feet seemed to ripple like the surface of a dark pond disturbed by an unseen force. Mara gripped the rough plaster of the wall, grounding herself, willing her mind not to fracture under the strain. Suddenly, a cold dread swept over her. Han image flashed in her mind's eye, her own body, frozen and sealed in a statue of cold. Unyielding wax, forever trapped in silent agony beneath the museum's suffocating surface. The thought was unbearable, suffocating in its finality, and Mara stumbled backward, gasping for air that felt thick and unyielding. "Simon," she whispered, clutching her phone to check the weak signal. No response. The silence mocked her, wrapping tighter than any chains. She was alone in this living tomb, a prisoner of shadows and stillness. As she pressed forward, guided only by the faint glow of her flashlight, the corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, walls closing in as the air thickened. Every step felt heavier, as if the museum sought to swallow her whole, to bind her to its eternal stillness. The wax figures loomed closer, their faces melding with the dark, their silent gazes suffocating her resolve. Mara forced herself to breathe deeply, focusing on the rough texture of the wall beneath her fingertips, the sharp scent of old wax and dust filling her nostrils. She repeated a mantra in her mind. She was alive. She was not one of them. She would not become a statue. But the suffocating nightmare pressed on, relentless and consuming. As the boundaries of time and space dissolved into a chaotic blur, Mara's pulse raced, her vision swimming with shadows and light. And she knew the deepest horrors of the waxen gallery were yet to come. And somewhere, deep beneath the cold surface of the wax, a darkness waited patient, eternal and hungry. The nightmare was just beginning. The waxen gallery seemed to breathe a silence so profound that it pressed heavily against Mara's chest, constricting her breath with the weight of unseen eyes. Each step she took echoed unnaturally loud, bouncing off the high, vaulted ceilings as if the shadows themselves absorbed the sound, twisting it into something sinister. The wax figures, once mere objects of chilling artistry, now loomed like sentinels, alive with malevolent intent. Mara's eyes darted from one figure to another, noticing subtle shifts she hadn't seen before. Fingers curled slightly, eyes glistened with a moisture that wasn't wax, and lips parted as if to whisper secrets just beyond her hearing. Her heart pounded as she moved deeper into the gallery, the air growing colder, heavier, suffused with an oppressive stillness that was anything but peaceful. The shadows cast by the figures writhed and stretched, contorting into grotesque shapes that toyed with her sanity. A faint murmur curled around her ears, susurrus of voices, fragmented and unintelligible, yet laced with a despair that clawed at her soul. In the cramped back room of the museum, Simon sat hunched over a cluttered desk, strewn with brittle papers and aged tomes. His fingers trembled as he turned the fragile pages, his breath fogging the glass of his glasses. The yellowed documents were written in archaic script, detailing rituals that bound the essence of life itself into wax, preserving not beauty but eternal imprisonment. Simon's eyes widened as he pieced together the curator's twisted masterpiece, a dark enchantment designed to capture and control souls, freezing them in an unending tableau of stillness and silence. "Mara," Simon whispered urgently over the phone, his voice tight with fear. "This isn't just about art or obsession. Elias Voss is enslaving people's souls, transforming the missing into these statues. The wax isn't just wax, it's a prison." Mara's grip on reality faltered as she clutched the phone. Her surroundings blurred. The wax figures seemed to flicker in and out of focus, their faces morphing into distorted masks of agony and rage. One statue's eyes caught hers, gleaming with a cruel intelligence as a slow, sinister smile crept across its lips before freezing again into stone-cold stillness. The gallery's oppressive atmosphere thickened, suffocating her with an unbearable weight. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and a cold sweat slicked her skin. She staggered back, nearly collapsing against the wall, battling the surge of paranoia that whispered the horrifying possibility that soon she too might be trapped beneath the wax, a silent witness to her own demise. Determined not to succumb, Mara forced herself to focus. Every detail mattered, the faintest flicker of movement, the softest whisper, the chilling cold that lingered in the air. She met Simon in a shadowed corner of the museum's depths, where the air was thick with dust and secrets. Their whispered exchange was frantic, yet measured as they laid bare the extent of the curator's dark ritual. "We have to find a way to break this," Mara said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "If these souls are trapped, then so are we unless we act." Simon nodded grimly, eyes scanning the room for threats unseen. Around them, the wax figures loomed like silent predators, their unnerving stillness a fragile veil for the horror lurking just beneath. Together, they faced the fractured reality of the waxen gallery, a nightmare, where the line between life and artifice had been grotesquely erased. With every heartbeat echoing in the suffocating silence, Mara and Simon prepared to delve deeper into the darkness, aware that the curator's malevolent influence was tightening its grip. As Mara glanced once more at the twisted shadows flitting across the cold marble, she steeled herself. The horror was no longer a distant mystery, it was a living nightmare, and she was trapped within its suffocating embrace. The question that burned through her mind was no longer if she could survive, but how she could escape the eternal stillness beneath the wax. And somewhere in the depths, those souls waited silent, frozen and desperate. The gallery held its breath, so did Mara, and the shadows waited to claim her next.